Imagine the wind howling across endless fields of cracked earth, carrying with it a chorus of anguished whispers from those who never left. Tonight, we venture into the heart of the Dust Bowl, where a drifter's search for shelter becomes a struggle for survival against vengeful spirits bound by a blood debt. Welcome to Wailing Spirits of the Dust Bowl, a tale of curses, ghostly plains, and secrets buried beneath dust and ruin. If you're ready to face the eerie truth that the plains never forget, hit subscribe and ring the bell so you won't miss a single haunting chapter. Share this story with fellow thrill seekers, leave your theories in the comments below, and follow us on social media for behind-the-scenes lore and spooky extras. Now, dim the lights, turn up the volume, and let the wailing begin. The late afternoon sun fought in vain against the gathering clouds of dust. At first, it was only a faint haze on the horizon, an amber veil drifting like a silent tide across the cracked expanse of the Oklahoma plains. Then the wind picked up, low and urgent, carrying with it the grit of 1,000 forgotten storms. You can almost taste it, the sand's bitter tang on your tongue, as it whips through the air in stinging swirls, scratching at your skin, invading every crevice of your clothing and your bones. Out here, there is nothing but the land and the sky, stretched wide and indifferent. But today, the land seems to breathe, and its breath is laden with warnings. As you crest the final rise, the silhouette of an abandoned farmstead materializes out of the dust. The skeletal frame of a barn jutting upward like a broken rib, a lean-to's timbers drooping in surrender, and, front and center, the lamenting remnant of a farmhouse. Its windows dark, its clapboards peeled and warped by years of sun and sand. A rickety fence encloses the overgrown yard, its posts scarred by rot and its rails hanging loose, like arms flung in desperation. This place was once home. Once, the fields around it must have rolled green with promise, rows of wheat and corn swaying in a gentle breeze. But that was before the storms began, the great storms that swallowed whole communities, that turned hopeful settlers into drifting ghosts. The Dust Bowl, they called it, a living curse that etched despair into the very soil. You step off the rutted dirt track onto the yard, boots crunching on parched stalks and the brittle husks of last season's crops. The wind roars now, a feral beast, tearing at the edges of your jacket. Against this howling, you can almost hear voices, faint at first, like distant cattle calls, then rising into a desperate chorus of wails. Takes a moment for realization to sink in. These are not human shouts. They are echoes of something older, something that will not rest. A gust sweeps under the broken porch and through the open door's crooked frame, carrying with it a single, hollow moan that resonates deep in your chest. You freeze. For a heartbeat, the world holds its breath. Then the wind presses forward again, and with it, that mournful sound repeats. A lost lament from lives cut short, from dreams that toppled in a swirl of dust and despair. Your heart thunders in your ears as you step onto the sagging porch boards. One creaks beneath your weight, as if protesting the intrusion. The door groans on its hinges, revealing a dim interior. A long hall strewn with debris, mottled wallpaper peeling like dead skin, and the cracked remains of an oil lamp on a small table. Beyond, in the gloom, shapes shift, rubble half buried in sand, outlines of furniture long abandoned to rot. You reach out and touch the doorframe. The wood is grimy and warm from the sun, but it bears a carved name, Halsey, 1927. Around it, strange symbols, roughly etched, curl into the grain signs meant to ward off evil, perhaps, or to seal something in. They have failed. Whatever was meant to stay imprisoned here has broken free, riding the storms. Stepping inside, you flick your flashlight on. The beam cuts a pale arc through the darkness, illuminating motes of dust dancing like embers in a dying fire. Everything is coated in a chalky film. The mantel clock stopped at 4:13. A child's rocking horse overturned in a corner, its paint faded. A photograph half hidden under rubble, the faces of a smiling family blurred by grit. Then you hear it again, the whisper. Soft, deliberate. Come back! You spin toward the sound, but find nothing. The beam quivers as your hand shakes. Somewhere ahead, the hallway opens into what must have been the living room. You follow, each step stirring up small clouds that drift away on the wind from outside. In the living room, the fireplace yawns like a dark mouth. On the hearth's edge lies a tattered ledger, its cover cracked and brittle. You kneel, gingerly lifting it. Inside, neat handwriting records the years. Names of crops sown, yields tallied, debts noted. And at the bottom of one page, a line written in a hand almost frantic. October 14th, 1931. The fields gave nothing but despair. We have borrowed blood to feed the land. May God forgive us. Blood. The word lodges in your throat. You glance up, and for a moment you think you see a figure across the room. A man in overalls, his face blurred as if glimpsed through a rain-drenched window. The beam catches the edge of a hat, a broad brim flopping down almost humanly. Then he is gone, swallowed by the dusty shadows. Your breath comes fast. The ledger slips from your fingers and thuds onto the floor. You fall back, hand pressed to your chest, as though you could physically stop the pounding of your heart. Ahead, in the center of the ceiling, a single floorboard drops to the ground with a muffled clack. But no wind came from above, and the storm outside rages louder, as if cheering on the fear. Gathering courage, you rise and cross the room to the doorway that leads to the kitchen. The air here is stale, heavy with the scent of decay, but beneath it, you catch the faintest whiff of something metallic, like rusted iron. You open the door. The kitchen is a tomb. Cracked dishes on the counter, drifts of dust in the corners, and patterns of claw-like etchings carved into the cupboard doors. In the center of the floor, a dark stain, long dried, but still unmistakably blood. You know instinctively whose blood it was. Not just any settlers, but the blood of the man who made the pact. The pact that promised a bountiful harvest in exchange for a sacrifice. And when the crops died anyway, the settlers tried to undo the bargain. But some debts cannot be erased. A sudden gust of wind slams the door behind you. You spin, heart in your throat, and see the room fall dark for a moment as the storm's shadow passes across the lone window pane. In the dim glow beyond, the stain on the floor seems to pulse, as if alive. You take a step back, and your boot touches something soft. You look down, a ragged piece of cloth, torn from a shirt, splattered with the same dark hue as the stain. Your flashlight flickers. You tap it, willing it to stay lit. As you do, you feel it. A tremor in the floor, a resonance. Beneath your feet, the boards thrum with remembrance. The land itself is echoing the ancient crime. And it is not done screaming. You force your trembling hand to grip the flashlight tighter and slowly turn toward the open door. Beyond it lies a narrow hallway leading upstairs and out to what might once have been the backyard. The sound beckons you, a whisper that threads through the storm. Find me. Curiosity clashes with dread in your chest. You've come this far. Turning back feels like betrayal. The only question is whether the story ends with your departure, or with your name carved alongside Halsey, 1927, on that doorframe. A final gust of wind howls through the broken window, carrying with it an unmistakable cry, a child's sob, frail and ancient. And then silence, a silence so deep it presses in on you from all sides. Your next step will decide everything. Will you chase the echo of that cry into the unknown? Or will you flee, leaving the curse to slumber once more beneath the shifting sands? Outside, the storm intensifies. Inside, the house waits. Its secrets half buried in dust, its spirits trapped between what was promised and what was taken. Somewhere in the gloom, something watches, and you can almost feel its eyes through the haze, waiting for you to choose. The choice is yours, but remember, the plains never forgive, and the wind never forgets. The drifter's boots crunched across the cracked earth like dry bones underfoot. Each step stirred miniature dust devils that danced in the beam of his flashlight, flickering off the horizon's restless glow. He paused at the crest of a small rise, heart hammering with both relief and unease. And yet the farm before him felt less like refuge than a trap. Its decaying buildings hunched against the rising wind, as if bracing themselves against some invisible terror. He set his pack down and traced the jagged outline of the windmill against the bruised sky. Its blades were frozen in mid-rotation, teeth-like and ominous, silhouetted black against the swirling clouds. A low moan seemed to emanate from its rusted gears, a slow, drawn-out creak that echoed the tortured history of this place. He swallowed hard. The windmill, once a source of life-giving water, had become a sentinel, guarding unspoken. The drifter crouched, prying loose a board with shaking fingers. Beneath it lay a small, waterlogged leather book bound in iron clasps, etched with the same runic symbols he'd seen on the walls. He lifted it, dust drifting up like mournful petals. The stranger lowered his scythe, and the wind died to a whisper. In the hush, the drifter opened the book. Its pages were filled with words in a language older than any he'd heard, interspersed with diagrams of blood-red circles and broken chains. At the center of the final page was a single line, written in spidery script, "By my blood, I free the bound." He exhaled, wiping sweat from his brow. The spirits gathered closer, their hollow gazes encouraging him. Taking a deep breath, he pressed his thumb to the blade of his pocket knife and let a drop of blood fall onto the inked circle. The wound burned white-hot, and he closed his eyes as the book absorbed the drop, the symbol flaring with a ghostly glow. A tremor shook the floor as the symbols on the wall blazed to life, and a chorus of anguished cries filled the air. Then, abruptly, silence. The windmill's blades began to turn, slowly at first, creaking like ancient joints. The scythe dropped from the stranger's hand, clattering to the boards. The stranger himself dissolved into a wisp of smoke that drifted toward the heavens. The spirits rose as one and formed a column of light streaming upward, their voices whispering, "Thank you, freedom." The drifter stepped back as the column ascended through the broken window, dissipating into the gathering night sky. When he glanced around, the apparitions were gone. The air felt lighter, as if the very soul of the farm had exhaled. He stumbled to his feet, heart pounding, and closed the ritual book. The storm outside had abated. Only a gentle breeze remained, carrying the soft rustle of distant wheat. The windmill's blades now turned in harmony with this breeze, almost serenely. He rose onto the porch, the first stars of night glinting overhead. Relief washed over him, but beneath it lay a new realization. The land had accepted his offering, but the cost had been steep. He touched his bleeding thumb, now throbbing, and realized this place would always be a part of him. With the ritual complete, the farmhouse no longer felt like a cage but a monument to what had been, and what must never happen again. He hefted his pack and set off down the path that led back toward the road, guided by starlight and an unspoken promise to remember. Behind him, the windmill stood sentinel no more, its blades now turning gently in the night breeze, an eternal reminder that some debts can be paid, but their echoes never truly fade. As the last sliver of sunset bled away, the wind shifted from a mournful sigh to something far more insistent, a low, rattling lament that rolled across the plains like a spectral tide. The drifter stood at the threshold of the abandoned farmhouse, pulse racing as he watched the sky darken to bruised purple. In the half-light, the world seemed to blur at the edges. The battered fence posts became skeletal fingers, the windmill's blades a great, gaping maw. He held his breath, listening as the wind carried voices, soft at first, then growing in urgency, rising to a cacophony of anguished cries. He fumbled for his flashlight, heart pounding so loud he feared it might burst from his chest. When he flicked it on, the beam quivered, and for a moment he felt as if he were staring down the barrel of something hungry. The voice rose with the wind. Our promise, our blood, our debt. It was neither male nor female, young nor old. It was every voice gripped by desperation, echoing across decades, voices bound to the land by a pact that had soured like the soil itself. He swallowed, stepping forward. Each footfall crunched through brittle stalks that littered the yard, remnants of a harvest that had failed before the curse took hold. The air was electric, charged with a presence that prickled every nerve. Above him, the windmill groaned, its iron gears grinding slowly, as though awakened by the cries. Summoning his courage, the drifter moved toward the edge of the field where the whispers seemed strongest. The ground here undulated in strange patterns, furrows that formed an almost circular shape, as if ringed by some old ritual. He stepped into the hollow, and the voices rose in a single keening wail that pierced the night. "Help us free!" He froze. The words wrapped around him, tangible as smoke, tugging at his resolve. Up close, the voices fractured into many, snatches of broken pleas and half-formed confessions. "He promised us rain, but delivered drought. We pledged our firstborn, and they took more. Our children starved. Our wives wept. Our hands stained red." The drifter's breath caught. He wanted to turn away, to flee back to whatever safety remained beyond the fields. But something held him fast. An ache of compassion for these voices, these souls crying out across time. He steadied himself and whispered, "I'm here. I'm listening." At his words, the wind stilled, and for a heartbeat there was only the hiss of his own ragged breathing. Then, before him, shapes began to materialize in the gloom, pale, translucent forms drifting just above the ground. They were faint at first. A tattered bonnet floating on an empty breeze, the outline of a plow horse turned to mist. As he watched, the shapes coalesced into figures wearing threadbare overalls and sun-bleached dresses, faces gaunt and eyes hollow. One figure stepped forward, a woman with soil-caked hair hanging in matted ropes. Her mouth opened in a silent scream, and though her lips did not move, he heard her clear as if she spoke into his ear. "We were farmers. We were proud. We fed our children from these fields. We swore to protect the land. But when the rains failed, we begged for mercy." Her voice cracked like breaking wood, and she lifted a trembling hand toward him. "We called upon the old powers." The voices rattled the walls, shaking loose plumes of dust. "Pay the debt." In the dim glow of his flashlight, he saw the same runic symbols etched on the doorframe. Symbols that had meant warning in part 1 and promise in part 2. Now they glowed faintly, as if leeching power from the very air. He backed away, heart pounding, until he found himself in the parlor. Once a place of family warmth, now a mausoleum of broken memories. He pressed himself against the far wall, wiping sweat from his brow. The whispers crackled like static. "You came here of your own will. You bear the mark of the windmill. You will settle the score." Settling the score. The weight of the words crushed him. He sank to his knees, burying his face in his hands. He had come seeking shelter, a reprieve from the dust and the sun. But what he found was a burden centuries old, passed from hand to hand, soul to soul. The land had claimed promises it could never keep, and now it was his turn to make good. A sudden hush fell. The drifter lifted his head, blinking through tears of dust. The room was still. The wind's roar dimmed to a distant breath. The only sound was his own ragged breathing. Then, clear and insistent, a single whisper. "Find the stone of reckoning beneath the hearth." He glanced around. Under the hearth, a place he had already searched, but perhaps not deeply enough. Swallowing hard, he rose and moved to the fireplace. The hearth was littered with rubble, ash, and charred fragments of wood. He knelt and brushed aside the debris. His fingers brushed something cold and wet, a rough stone slab carved with the same blood-drop windmill motif. He traced the edge with his thumb, feeling the etchings. The stone felt alive under his touch, pulsing with the heartbeat of the land. He pressed down and it shifted. With a groan of resistance, the slab slid aside to reveal a hollow beneath. Inside lay a small, leather-bound book, its pages stained black and red. The book pulsed in his hand, as if beckoning him to open it. He hesitated, heart in his throat. Then, steeling himself, he cracked it open. The pages were written in the same ancient tongue as the inscriptions he'd seen before, but one passage stood out, inscribed in fresh ink. "He who offers blood to the land must speak the names of those who perished, and offer their tears for the broken bond." Tears, he had shed them already, but for his own fear. Now he understood. The land demanded not only blood, but acknowledgement. He had to remember every soul lost here, speak their names, mourn their passing. Only then could the curse be lifted. A sudden gust rattled the window panes, and the voices swelled once more, mingled with sorrow and hope. John Halsey, Mary Halsey, Samuel and Ruth, we remember. He closed his eyes and let the names roll from his tongue, each one a plea, each one a promise. As he spoke, tears, real tears, streamed down his dusty cheeks. His voice cracked with grief, but he would not falter. He named every lost settler, every hungry child, every desperate mother. He spoke of their broken oaths and stolen futures, of the blighted fields and the howling dust storms. By the time he spoke the last name, the land itself seemed to tremble. The runes on the walls flared, and the windmill's blade groaned through the broken window. Then, with a final, echoing sigh, the whispers ceased. Silence fell heavy, but not oppressive. Felt like peace. He rose unsteadily, the cursed book still clutched in his hand. The hollow beneath the hearth was empty now. The stone slab had sealed itself as if it had never moved. The field beyond was still, the windmill's silhouette quiet against the star-strewn sky. The absence of voices felt sacred, as if the souls he had honored could finally rest. The drifter stepped back into the night. His knees trembled, but his heart was lighter, freed, perhaps, from some part of the curse that had bound him since his first footfall on this land. He looked up at the sky, where the Milky Way arched in luminous splendor, and for the first time since the storm, he found himself smiling through his tears. Tonight, beneath the vast expanse of stars, he had listened, he had mourned, and the land had forgiven. The moon had risen full and pale, its light casting long, skeletal shadows across the dust-scoured fields. The drifter paused at the edge of the old orchard, flashlight held like a talisman, beam quivering in the still air. Behind him, the ruins of the farmhouse lay silent and watchful. Before him, the warping silhouettes of apple trees gnarled like arthritic limbs. Somewhere in the wind, a lone branch cracked, a hollow sound that echoed like a distant gunshot. He swallowed hard, tracing a slow breath through his parched lips. In the distance, he thought he saw movement among the trees. A flicker of tattered cloth, a flash of something as pale as bone. His heart slammed against his ribs. Stepping forward, he entered what must have been the family orchard. Once a place of blossom and promise, now a graveyard of withered trunks and brittle leaves crushed to powder. The ground beneath his boots gave way, sending up a miniature whirlwind of dust that settled like ashes around him. His flashlight caught the edge of a figure, a man in work-worn overalls, his face ashen, features blurred by decades of sorrow. The apparition stood motionless, hands extended in a gesture that felt almost pleading. The drifter's breath hitched. He had expected malevolence, but here was something neither entirely hostile nor entirely human. An echo of fear, of grief, of longing. Slowly, more figures emerged. A woman clutching a broken flower basket, her wedding dress threadbare. A boy no older than 10, baseball cap askew, gaze fixed on some unseen horizon. A girl with hair like tangled wheat, head bowed as if in prayer. Not one spoke. Instead, a chorus of soft, dry sighs rose on the breeze, as if the trees themselves lamented the years of abandonment. The drifter's flashlight beam danced across their outlines, illuminating the ragged edges of their garments, the hollows where cheeks had once held life. With each step deeper into the orchard, his pulse raced. He knew what they demanded. In the ledger he discovered beneath the hearth, their names were written in shaky script, names long since blanketed by sand and silence. They were the families who had forged this land, who had watched their hopes dry up beneath the merciless dust. They had bargained for mercy, then been abandoned by the very soil they nurtured. Their bodies, half buried and forgotten, cried out through the centuries for the justice they had never received. A sudden draft swept through the orchard, carrying with it the scent of crushed apples and something metallic, old blood. The figures stiffened, turning as one toward the drifter. Their many voices whispered in unison, low and desperate, "Justice, justice, justice." The drifter's stomach clenched. He began, voice cracking. But the ghostly settlement interrupted him in their shared cadence. Our bodies unclaimed, our graves unmarked, our stories untold. Their empty eyes bore into his, and he felt a wave of guilt crash within him. These were not vengeful wraiths. They were victims of neglect, of a broken promise. They had cared for this land with calloused hands and hopeful hearts, only to be consumed by it. And now, their souls drifted, trapped between hope and despair. He swallowed, voice steadying. "I'm sorry," he said, though his words felt feeble against the weight of centuries. "I didn't know. I want to help you." The woman in the wedding dress tilted her head, as if considering his sincerity. At her silent gesture, the apparitions moved as one, drifting aside to reveal a narrow path between the trees. In the soft moonlight, he saw indentations in the earth, shallow depressions where the branches arched overhead like memorial arches. Each depression was lined with fragments of pottery, rusted tools, broken toys, tokens of lives abruptly ended. The boy's voice, fragile as a breath, whispered, "We were buried, without ceremony, without our names, without a mourner's tear." The drifter knelt beside the first depression. He swept his hand over a moss-chipped horseshoe, then picked up a dusty tin cup. He could almost feel the pulse of memory in these artifacts. Carefully, he laid them in a small pouch at his belt. Then he drew from his pack a tattered notepad and scribbled the name he'd read in the ledger, Samuel Vance. Beneath it, he wrote the date the ledger had recorded, April 23, 1932. Rising, he spoke softly, "Samuel Vance, I will remember you. I will bury you with dignity." No sooner had the words left his lips than the air shimmered. At the center of the depression, a faint glow emerged, a circle of pale light that pulsed like a heartbeat. The ground beneath him trembled, and from the glow arose the specter of a man wearing a straw hat, face solemn, eyes glistening. He bowed his head in silent thanks, and then the circle faded, leaving behind a sense of calm in its wake. Emboldened, the drifter moved to the next hollow. "Mary Halsey," he intoned, holding the broken basket in both hands. "I will honor you." Again, the earth responded. A silvery light arced upward, and the ghost of a woman in a faded calico dress stepped forward, her hand brushing the basket as if reclaiming a piece of her life. She nodded once, a gesture of serene gratitude, before fading into the orchard's hush. With each name and each token, the drifter felt the oppressive weight on his chest lighten. The ritual was simple yet profound. Acknowledgement, remembrance, and apology. He spoke of the dead as though addressing dear friends, recounting their hopes to nourish a farm, their dread as dust storms roared, and their heartbreaking decision to invoke powers they scarcely understood. By the time he reached the final hollow, a shallow grave edged with broken plowshares, he was trembling with exhaustion. The parched earth at his feet had no artifact, only a faded photograph half buried in dust. A child's smiling face peering from behind a straw fence. He picked it up with gloved reverence. "Ruth and Samuel," he whispered, "I will not forget you." He held the photo to his heart, then placed it gently upon the grave. A soft breeze stirred, lifting loose hairs on his forehead. The ground glowed brightest here, and a shimmering figure of two children walked hand in hand into the light, faces alight with relief. They turned and smiled at him, mouths movementless but eyes sparkling with gratitude, before vanishing like dawn's mist. Silence fell upon the orchard, deep, holy silence. The windmill's mournful creak was gone. The ruined fences no longer rattled. Even the moon seemed still, its reflection muted in the dusty sky. The drifter lowered himself onto the cracked ground, breathing in and out in slow, measured rhythm. Somewhere behind him, the apparitions gathered once more, standing in a loose circle around the cleared hollows. They faced him, not with empty eyes, but with something warmer. Acceptance, perhaps, or a final benediction. The drifter raised his flashlight in salute. His voice, soft and exhausted, carried across the orchard. "I have remembered you. I have honored you. May you find peace at last." The woman in the wedding dress stepped forward, her spectral hand reaching out as though to rest upon his shoulder. In that instant, he felt a warmth, gentle, maternal, as if her grief had been lifted from his shoulders. Then, as though a veil lifted, her form dissolved into a cascade of silver motes, drifting skyward and disappearing into the night. Each of the specters followed, one by one, until only the boy remained. He lingered, raising a small hand in farewell. The drifter nodded, pushing himself to his feet. The boy smiled, an expression at once joyful and heartbreaking, before stepping into the light himself and vanishing. When the final child's ghost faded, the drifter found himself utterly alone. The orchard was empty, the depressions quiet except for the soft rustle of dry leaves. In his pocket, the photograph remained, now tinted with faint luminescence as though it too had been consecrated. He slid the photograph into his notepad, then gathered his pouch of tokens. Rising, he took one last look at the orchard. Where once the ghosts had lingered, now there was only moonlit dust and the distant horizon. But the air felt different, lighter, as though the earth itself had exhaled relief. He turned toward the farmhouse, gazing at its dark silhouette against the star-spangled sky. Inside lay unfinished business. The tome of the blood covenant waited beneath the hearth, its pages promising both danger and resolution. The drifter's jaw set with quiet determination. He would face whatever remained there, armed with the knowledge that he had honored the dead and restored a measure of justice. As he stepped onto the cracked porch, the door creaked open of its own accord, welcoming him back. For the first time since his arrival, the house felt less like a tomb and more like a sanctuary, a place where the living could reconcile with the past, and where the dead could at last rest. He paused on the threshold, flashlight raised, and murmured a prayer to the wind. May your souls sleep now, freed from this torment. May your stories be told, your names remembered, and may no one ever suffer this curse again. Then, with a final steadying breath, he stepped back into the darkness of the farmhouse, ready to confront the last vestiges of the ancient pact, and to uncover what price would finally end the blood debt of the Dust Bowl. The first pale fingers of dawn crept over the horizon, painting the sky in bruised purples and sickly gold. The farmhouse lay silent beneath this wan light, its windows like unseeing eyes still haunted by the night's terrors. The drifter, exhausted and trembling, stood in the clearing beside the broken windmill, clutching the ancient will in one hand and the ritual knife in the other. His breath puffed in ragged clouds, his body pulsing with the aftershocks of the night's ceremonies. Moments before, he had descended into the farmhouse cellar, where the ledger lay buried beneath years of dust and cobwebs, and read aloud the passage that bound settler to soil in blood and fear. By our sacrifice, the land shall feed us. By our blood, we seal this covenant. And should the winds forsake our fields, the debt must be repaid in kind. His voice had echoed through the damp stone chamber, stirring motes of dust like restless spirits. Then, beneath a single flickering lantern, he traced the ritual circle in the dirt, using the leather-bound will itself as a makeshift altar. He cut his palm, letting his blood fall onto the page, each crimson droplet hissing as it touched the parchment, and invoked the names of those whose lives had been claimed by the Dust Bowl. John Halsey, Mary Vance, Samuel, and Ruth Carter, and every soul whose memory had withered away into dust. First, nothing happened. The lantern guttered, and the only sound was the distant groan of shifting earth. Then, from the walls, a soft chorus of sighs rose, a multitude of voices, at once weary and relieved. The air shimmered with pale light as the trapped spirits lifted from the ledger's pages, swirling above the drifter's head before coalescing into a brilliant column that cracked the cellar's ceiling and shot upward like a beam of spectral candlelight. In that moment, the curse fractured. Bonds snapped, chains fell away, and the ghosts who had haunted the farmhouse for decades drifted free. He had stumbled from the cellar into the cool morning air, blinking against the sudden quiet. The windmill's creaks had stilled, the orchard's rustle hushed. For a fleeting heartbeat, the world seemed whole. But relief was never so simple. Now, standing in the chill air, the drifter looked back up at the windmill. Its blades were still, But as the sun's rays swept across its rusted metal, they revealed fresh streaks of crimson, as though the curse had seeped from its gears overnight. He swallowed, heart-pounding. He walked down the narrow path toward the barn. The ground beneath his boots was stained in places, dark patches of soil that shimmered like spilled oil. Each step seemed to echo with soft whispering, distant and mournful. "Remember us, remember us." His skin crawled. He clenched the will tightly, as if its brittle pages could ward off the lingering dread. Around him, the fields lay ashen, rows of skeletal stalks poking through cracked earth. But between the rows, tiny green shoots had begun to stir, fragile blades of grass that quivered in the morning breeze, a quiet plea for forgiveness and renewal. He knelt and pressed a hand to the richest patch of soil. His fingers sank into cool dirt, and he felt a tremor run through the ground. Above the fields, a single crow called sharp and insistent, before taking flight into a sky still heavy with dust. A distant memory flickered. The settler who had first scrawled the ritual in desperation. The promise made at the height of their fear that the land shall feed us, or our blood shall nourish it. That promise had warped into a demand, binding spirits until someone brave or foolish enough dared to break it. He had thought freeing the cellar ghosts was the final act, but the land itself still bore the scar of that ancient bargain. Crouched by the barn's foundation, he found what he sought. A small stone marker, etched with runes identical to those in the ledger. Under the marker, a shallow chamber held one last remnant of the pact, a bone-white token carved in the shape of a blood-drop windmill. He lifted it, feeling its chill seep into his palm. Above him, the barn's loft groaned, and for a moment, he glimpsed movement through the weather-worn slats. A shape drifting across the rafters, a figure cloaked in moonlight and dust. He froze, heart thundering. Then, gentle as a sigh, the night's last spirit descended. It was the face of a child, a little girl with hollow eyes and a single braid of dusty hair. She clutched a tattered rag doll, its seams torn. She looked at him and whispered, her voice a distant echo, "Finish it, please." He felt tears spring to his eyes. For a heartbeat, he saw her as she must have been. Laughter in her eyes, the promise of tomorrow on her lips. Then reality snapped back. She was dust and longing now, trapped until her debt was paid. Holding the bone-white token, he closed his eyes and spoke aloud. "By this token I release you. By my hands, I free your soul." He dropped the token into the chamber. It landed with a soft click, and the bone-white symbol crumbled into a swirl of motes that rose like pollen in the early sun. The little girl's ghost looked on, mouth trembling in a smile, before drifting upward to join the light that danced among the rafters. One by one, the last echoes of the curse dissipated. No scream, no clash of chains, only a soft hissing, like wind through long-dead wheat. When it ended, the barn was empty, still at peace. He emerged into full daylight, blinking against the brilliance. The sun broke through cotton-white clouds, warming his shoulders as if offering comfort. The field seemed different now, no longer gaunt and accusing, but ready to heal. The windmill's blades turned slowly, creaking in a hopeful rhythm rather than sorrowful lament. The drifter folded the will, now stained with both blood and dust, and placed it carefully atop a flat stone near the well. He set a small marker beside it. 2 simple words carved deep in wood. "Here ends the debt." He stood back, chest tight with emotion. The weight of countless souls had pressed on him all night, yet he had borne it, honoring each name, each memory. He realized that though the curse had been broken, its echo would linger in the winds and in the land. Anyone who passed through the dust bowl would carry a piece of its sorrow, and, perhaps, a spark of its redemption. He took a last, lingering look at the farmstead. Its battered porch, its silent windows, the windmill now turning in the morning light. A sense of profound finality settled over him. Then, with a steady step, he turned away and began his journey back to the road. If you've been drawn into this tale of ancient pacts, restless spirits, and a single drifter's courage, remember to subscribe to Horror Story for more chilling journeys into forgotten places. Drop a comment below with your own theories or experiences with haunted lands. Your stories enrich this channel and keep the spirits alive. Hit the like button if you felt the wind's lament, and share this video with fellow horror fans so they, too, can carry a sliver of the Dust Bowl's haunting legacy. Until next time, keep your lanterns lit and watch the wind.